Hey MiniWarGamers, and welcome to episode 10 of the Machine Shop with Ash. This is my weekly show about war games and war gamers, where we pick a topic. Usually I either editorialize or expand on my view of that topic for you guys to listen to. Again, it's just my opinions, so take that with a grain of salt. But it usually leads to some interesting discussion, and that's how new shows like this get made. So this week we're going to be talking about shaking up the game. It's kind of a dovetail from last week's episode, which was Ready to Quit, where people rage out, hulk out, and get emotionally invested in something that's going on. So from that sort of like talking point, I think it's worthwhile maybe exploring changes in and of themselves, because your reaction to a change might be very strong. You might have an emotional investment in what you're doing, and so you might have an emotional reaction to something. We talked about that last week. But change in and of itself is not either good or bad. It just is. You can't put a value judgment on something that's happened, but you can put a value judgment, of course, on its impact on you. So I think that's worth talking about, and that's the topic of this show is the changes, shaking up a game. Why do we shake up a game? What are the reasons for companies doing that? What are the net impacts or effects that could happen? And then sort of at the end, talking about the failure to communicate between individuals and why changes lead to so much discussion. So let's get right to talking about the whys. All right, so let's jump right into it. Let's talk about why do things change. Now, there were some things we talked about last week, like the people in your life and stuff like that could change. Price was talked about a little bit in the comments. Those things can change. That's not shaking up the game, though. Shaking up the game, when I talk about shaking up the game, I mean doing something to the nature of the game, how it's played, what it's played with, that inherently changes the structure from its previous state. So we're not going to concern ourselves with business practices here. We're strictly talking about changes to a game. Why do they take place and why do people do them? So there's tons of examples that we could talk about right now that are contemporary and currently going on. Three I'm going to talk about in general. I'm going to talk about Steamroller 2015. Steamroller 2015 is a change to the competitive play format for War Machine Hordes. It's a game that I've been involved in a lot around here, so I think it's worth talking about. We're talking about N3, the third edition of Infinity, a game I'm super excited about. The rules have changed fairly dramatically in some regards. And also there's an expectation for the 2015 tournament pack for that game as well. So a big shake up there, a new edition of the game. And we're going to talk about the end times in Warhammer Fantasy. So again, the three games that I'm kind of working on, I think they're all relevant talking points. The end times has brought a lot of fluff, story, and background changes, army composition changes, and core rule mechanic changes to the game Warhammer that are fairly significant. So I think they're worth talking about. So those are our talking points. We'll use those three as an example, but those aren't necessarily the reason we're talking about this show. What we're talking about here is, why did those changes get made? So let's think, if you're a company, what you need to do is you need to examine a change at a certain point in being a company. Usually it's when your sales flatten. So if you're a company that is about to do a change or is sort of set into a cycle or rotation of changes, it's because you are trying to drive sales by doing that. A great example of that would be Warhammer Fantasy previous editions from now, really. So we're going to talk about end times later on. But one of the nature of Warhammer Fantasy things from previous editions was, visually on the tabletop, it was very much my squares fighting your squares. The biggest monsters still couldn't even compete with a Land Raider in terms of size, and certainly couldn't compete in terms of a Titan. There was nothing in the game Warhammer that was that size. So from a visual point of view, it might not have seemed as eye-catching or inspiring as another product line that company was selling. There's always people talking about how you see more 40K gamers than fantasy gamers. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think there is certainly a visual thing to 40K that makes it easier to see and more impressive on the table up until just recently. So in the most recent editions of Fantasy, one of the big changes was allowing more and bigger monsters into the game, introducing bigger monster kits that are very, very attractive and imposing on the table, and using bigger units, using horde formations, using giant chunky blocks units of armies instead of just little units of fast cav. Anybody who's in Warhammer for a long time remember the term MSU, many small units. It was a 6th and 7th edition fantasy staple that multiple small maneuverable units were the kings of the battlefield. Not so much anymore, and it's a different playing field because of shaking up the game. The game's been shaken up by several editions, and of course now with the new version of sort of fantasy, it's being shaped by these end times events, being changed even more. So it's going to drive sales. In particular for Games Workshop in that scenario, It's driving sales of bigger, larger monster kits. It's driving rulebook sales. So there's all these different rulebooks come out. So you've got these new rulebooks that you can buy. And it's also, by nature of the change of the rules, making certain units they may not have sold more of, like in 7th edition or 8th edition fantasy, more attractive. Big blocks of infantry. You will sell more of those units individually because you've made them more attractive in game terms. So that tends to be the biggest driver to why changes happen in a game. I can give you another game analog. Magic the Gathering for years had a gaming format called Type 2 Magic, which was basically the last 3 sets of Magic in play. Now correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a huge Magic player, but I have an understanding of Magic based on its business principles, not necessarily on its gameplay principles. So if I get something wrong talking about Magic here, I apologize, but I'm not a Magic guy. I'm a guy who understands what Magic does for a small business owner. So Type 2 Magic, for years and years and years, was about the last 3 sets in play. And from a changing up the game point of view, what Wizards of the Coast did that was absolutely brilliant and made every retailer fall in love with them was they cycled a set out in their most competitive and sort of biggest accepted format and introduced through new releases a new set. I think it was every 3 months. It might not have been every quarter. Maybe it was every half year. 3 to 6 months. It was on a regular basis, though. You could basically set your watch by when a new set was coming out. And it was predictable income influx. You knew that these cards were going to come out. And these cards might do a bunch of things. They might make the other 2 sets still in play more valuable. So cards that weren't necessarily great in the last 3 sets might become more valuable. And it also would introduce all kinds of new things in itself that people would want to buy. They'd come into Friday Night Magic to try and play for them. They would buy them as singles. They would buy tons of cases of cards to try and get them all. So taking a Magic analogy, you can apply the exact same thing to miniature games in general. War Machine has a great system for doing that through introducing tier lists in No Quarter and introducing new warcasters that do better or worse things with infantry, warjacks, war beasts, whatever it is that they are good at using and make them better. But it's all meant to drive sales. Now, if you use what's called in business terms a SWOT analysis, the time that those changes usually take place is fairly predictable. So SWOT means strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. If you're a business and you're trying to sell widgets, cards, whatever, whenever you want to change something, you have an idea, you'll run it through that matrix. You'll say, what's the strengths of this idea? Well, so for instance, if we use Magic as the analogy again, or if we use N3, actually no, let's use Infinity, we haven't talked about that yet. We use Infinity as an example. The strengths of this idea are we can take a core bunch of rules that we've had to addendum a great deal through online FAQs, rulings in the forums, blah, blah, our wiki, and we can flatten them back down all into one book. So everything can be more understandable. All the information that's scattered all to the wind can all be pulled back into one place, and people get excited about it. What are the other strengths of this idea? We can introduce some new things that will get people to buy stuff. People will buy a new rulebook because they like our game, so typically they will spend money to buy a new rulebook. We're going to give it away for free too, but that's an income generator for us. We can advance the storyline. We can expand the storyline. Bunch of strengths to this idea. What are the weaknesses to this idea? Well, people have already paid for rulebooks, so that could be a weakness. They may not want to pay for this rulebook if we've been giving it away for free for a long time. Other weaknesses, we don't want to update all of our books at once. So we have 2 other books that are going to be currently out there. We're going to have to make sure that our rules are still compatible with those books in the meantime. And also, we don't want to put every single model in this rulebook because the model stat lines are spread across multiple books and because of the fact that we also have our own online army builder thing that we give away the rules for free in. So we have to be careful how we do this. The weakness in this plan is we have to very carefully slice the components out that we want, put them in this book, and make sure everything that goes with it is also still compatible or that we update it in a timely manner or whatever. So the opportunities there, again, huge opportunities, sell more rule books, change the nature of the rules. You might sell more models people currently didn't buy. Lots of people used hackers as specialists in ITS, but hackers are now amazing in Infinity. They are super huge, like basically the Wizards of the future, which I think is fantastic. Opportunity to sell more of those miniatures, opportunity to sell gizmos, ancillary products, whatever. Threats. People might not like the changes. It's always going to be a threat. People might decide to leave. The current army that they play that's really, really good in this edition or this format might not be as good or as powerful in the new format. So they might be dissatisfied and they might leave too. It's a threat. It could happen. It's a thing that might, be the case. But honestly, if you look at a threat, anytime you make a change, that threat's going to be sitting there. Somebody's going to be unhappy because somebody's really invested in something that's no longer there. It's just going to be a threat and change. So if you look at that analysis, probably a lot more strengths and opportunities than there are weaknesses and threats. So that's when those changes happen. N3 is coming on N2, which I think is probably about 5 or 6 years old now, 4 or 5 years old maybe. But it's fairly long in the tooth as far as game editions go. So it was fairly timely, and they went and they did it, and those changes happened. And I'm hoping, Carlos, if you see this, or any other guys over at Corvus Belly, then it's been super successful for you, because you make a great game. I think you guys have handled your game release with lots of grace. And yeah, that you guys continue to make cool miniatures that I can buy and paint, or send them to me, and I'll paint them and put them in videos. So there it is. We've got tons and tons of reasons for doing change, but they all boil back down to one thing. Sorry, they'll impact tons and tons of different things. They all boil back down to one thing, which is businesses are businesses, and when you make big changes, typically you're doing it to try and drive sales. All right, so you ready to quit? Go back and watch my other video. Actually, you're probably not ready to quit. Changes happen, but they are changes. And that's the second half of this video. As I said this at the very beginning, but you can't put a value judgment on change. All you can do is put a value judgment on the impact of the change on you. So typically, when a change happens, it's not happening just cause. And like in the last video that I did, a gut check might be in order for you if you find yourself emotionally reacting in a negative way to changes, to shaking up the game. But here's some big positives shaking up the game, is if you do it right, that game's gonna be around longer. It's gonna attract new players, so you're gonna have more opponents, you're gonna have more games to play. They're probably gonna release more and new products so they get the cash to do so. And generally speaking, the health of a war game is that it is typically on a fairly predictable schedule, always in a state of change. Doesn't stagnate and stay the same. If something stays the same for too long, it's usually because there's nobody who's got any money or time to invest in freshening it, adding stuff to it, or expanding it. So you can see changes typically, or shifting or shaking or putting it all up in the air again and releasing a new edition as a fairly healthy thing in a business. It means there's enough people playing it and they feel safe, and that SWOT analysis has been successful enough to say, yes, we can do this, we can shake it up, we can make it fresh and exciting and interesting, and hopefully that guy who's jaded, who's played the game a million times exactly the same way, is gonna get stoked about it again, there's gonna be something new for him, and he's gonna come spend some more money with us. That's a positive. It never happens just because. It happens because these guys see an opportunity and they've got the capital to go and make those changes. So that's a positive thing. Usually if you want to look for the opportunities in it, for the things that you could be excited about, is check out what you couldn't do then that you can do now. If you want to play the same games over and over again, you might be having an emotional reaction to a change, go watch my other video. This might not be something that you want to hear, but usually whenever there's a big change in a game system or in the miniature line or something like that, you have a new opportunity. You have the ability to do something that you couldn't do before. If I look at the changes that are coming in Steamroller 2015, they've been previewed a few times in some tournaments. There's going to be some opportunity for you to interact with your tournament experience through objective selection and army construction that you didn't have previously. And I think that's super cool. I don't ever want to play a game that's the same all the time because I'll get bored by it. That's why I come up with crazy narratives. That's why I write my own miniature games, is I'm always excited and jazzed about something new. And if I get given something new and to be jazzed about, that is my favorite time in the hobby. I talked about this a little bit during my N3 review, but my most excited that I will ever be in a miniature game is when I am figuring it out for the first time. So new editions for me are perfect because it levels the playing field, because I'm not a very good player too, but it also puts us all into a place where we are figuring it out together. And that's the most enjoyable part of a miniature game for me, and probably why I play so many miniature games, is that joy of figuring it out for the first time, learning new tricks, and getting good at something, or at least getting competent at something so you can play it, is my most sort of like passionate I will ever be about a given game. So N3 is great for me. Steamroller 2015 is going to be great for me because it's going to throw all the bones back into the bag, shake them up, toss them on the table, and we're going to get a new sort of landscape for a game. That happens with codex releases, that happens with model changes and model releases. Everything is shaken up again, and you get a chance to look at it with fresh eyes. And for me, that's exciting. That's what jazzes me up about the hobby. So now, fluff things, those might impact you too. Fluff might change. The high elf stuff going on in Warhammer Fantasy Battle right now is fairly controversial with high elf players because you're getting some pretty big changes to the nature of relationships in that sort of like universe. If anyone ever said that like Teclis and Marathi would be high-fiving their way through a battle, I probably would have said you were crazy. But we're changing things. We're throwing it up in the air. Crazy alliances are being made. The end times are here. And who knows what's going to happen. I, for one, I'm more excited to kind of like see where it goes than anything else. It's not like the Horus Heresy. The Horus Heresy is like watching the movie Titanic over and over again. Everybody knows how it ends. And yes, there's these moments where you're like, oh, it could all be okay, but it's not going to be okay. Horus is going to fight the Emperor. He's going to die. The Emperor is going to end up in the Golden Throne. Case closed. And all little cool side stories along the way are awesome and interesting and shine a flashlight on things that, you know, were shadowy mystery a little bit before. But you always know how it's going to end. The end times are unwritten, so I'm excited about that, to see what crazy direction this all goes in and what new legends get forged because of it. So I think that's an interesting thing, is that there's a failure to communicate internally sometimes with people, where they don't see the things that they could do now or have now or can be excited about now. They kind of dwell on the things that they were able to do before that they really liked. And they can't detach. So there's always an opportunity in change, and that's a great way of looking at it. Now, there is a ancient Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, but I think that's less of a curse and more of just a reality. It's also a really good Terry Pratchett novel if you've never read it. But interesting times are where we're at in the wargaming community right now. Lots of changes in some pretty major games, and I, for one, personally, am excited about it. I don't feel like I want to be a part of a community or work in an industry where things are constantly stagnating. Change is healthy. It can hurt while you're going through it a little bit, especially if you're really emotionally invested in something. When you come at the other end, you realize that you probably had a lot more opportunities to do a lot more things that you couldn't do before. All right, so here we are for On the Painting Table this week with me. You can see what I've been working on. I'm going to shoot it up close again for you and tell you a little bit about it. All right, so here's what's on the painting table this week. I don't know if I should call him a miniature because he's kind of a bigature. And it's my galleon for my mercs. I am in the War Machine League currently out of painted lists. Because of lots of cancellations, I ended up playing way more games in the league than I wanted to. And that means that my Khador and Menoth lists are all depleted, and I am down to nothing but mercs. Now, I am one model away from having a completed merc list, and that was my Reinhold. You can see him over there on the right. But my galleon was in the way of me and having stuff painted, and he's in every merc list I have right now because I'm super excited about him. So you'll see I've magnetized the arms. One of the problems with a lot of Colossals is they hang way off their base, and it's hard to get in base to base with them. And also for transportation purposes, I wanted to make sure I could peel those arms off. There's two big fat half-inch magnets in here, and I've also got finishing nails going all the way through his arm and as posts. And what those do is when you have magnets, if you put something in there, it keeps them from rotating too far. They'll just basically sit on the post and the magnet will hold them in place. And he's nice and sturdy when he's sitting there by himself. So he's painted to match Magnus and all Magnus's jacks because in the background, the galleon's actually created and commissioned by Magnus for his rebellion, and all the other merc casters get them off him, so I figured it would be in my black and steel Magnus colors that all of his other jacks are painted in. He's, again, just a meat and potatoes paint job, but it's War Machine, so people don't necessarily handle War Machine miniatures gently, and I wasn't going to spend a huge amount of time on him. So he's been highlighted, nice blue-gray, just to make all the edges pop out. All the metallics were airbrushed on, weathered, and washed a little bit. And then there's that cool fire from within that I do for all my my merc jacks, just to make them look like they're glowing from the inside out. And that's him. And I've also got Gaston Cross in one of my lists. He's actually the journeyman warcaster that the galleon is hanging out with. So again, nice meat and potatoes paint job, just highlighted up to some simple sort of green colors. And then, of course, Reini Reinhold, one of the original merc miniatures from Prime Mark 1. Still in play today, and he just base coated right now. He's gonna get finished this week, and then I'm finished. So there's On the Painting Table, Galleon, Gaston, Cross, and Reinhold. All right, so there was this week's On the Painting Table, and of course, episode 10 of the Machine Shop, which was shaking up the game. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to chat with me about this or any other topics for Machine Shops, you can hit me up in the comments. I'll try and keep track of the comments on YouTube, but it's easiest to reply to something I've already said or reply to whatever I post for me to actually see it, because otherwise they get kind of long. Commenting on the MiniWarGaming site, again, it's hard because it's just the nature of that commenting system. Replying to people and seeing it is really difficult. Best way to get in touch with me is to hit my Facebook page. It's facebook.com/outofthebasement-into-the-streets. And I will get back to you right away because that just shows up on my phone. I can talk to anybody who posts. We will see you next time for more Machine Shop. Can't believe I've done 10 episodes of these so far. It's 10 weeks of doing these. It feels like I just started. So until then, next week's Machine Shop, I'll see you. This is Ash, and happy wargaming.